Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars.
SoundCartel.
Urgent. When is something urgent? Only when a real emergency hits does it put the word into perspective. And yet still, it's a word that has so much control over us in the workplace. Or perhaps we allow it to. From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. Do you often feel that everything has to be done right now? Or perhaps working from home, there's less to do and you're anxious about a loss of productivity? These hang-ups we have about urgency can be destructive, says productivity expert Dermot Crowley. He addresses the ability to balance and control urgency in his book aptly titled Urgent. Chris Ashmore asks Dermot why, in the modern world, we're all in such a hurry.
God, isn't it interesting? I reflect back to my father. I grew up in Dublin and my father was a senior manager in an organisation in Dublin. And he had a very big office with a very big desk and he had an executive assistant. And I suppose he was very important in his own way, but he wasn't that busy. And I remember as a kid going into his office, he always seemed to have a lot to do, but he wasn't that busy. He wasn't in a hurry. He didn't rush things. Maybe that was in the 1970s. What's changed between now and then? I think everyone feels busier and everyone is going at 1,000,000 miles an hour. We're getting a lot of communications, we're attending a lot of meetings and we're doing a lot of activities, but I really question whether we're achieving better outcomes than they did when my father was an executive. I think that the big change has been technology and specifically the rise of email in the way we do our work. My father didn't have to deal with email, but we do. And I reckon when people are getting 100 or 200 or 300 emails a day, plus they're expected to be in meetings a lot of the time, it's just building pressure up. So people tend to fall behind on their work and then everything becomes urgent. And we just get into this negative cycle of reactivity that is unnecessary.
So it's responding to the urgency by being reactive rather than proactive. Would that be fair to say?
Look, I think most people really try to be proactive, and the challenge is they're often dealing with a culture that they're working in that actually crushes proactivity and forces them to work reactively. Reactivity is a response to urgency, and when everything is urgent, then the quality of our work tends to go down. And we tend to leave things until the last minute too often. I reckon there's probably 3 types of urgency that people are dealing with. There's what I call fake urgency, and that's where people are either dealing with something that really isn't urgent, but they've made it urgent themselves. And I see this a lot with email. You know, if you've got people who are just reacting every time an email comes onto their phone, they're creating urgency that is not real, it's fake. But sometimes other people create the fake urgency and they push it onto us because they're the squeaky wheel and they know that if they scream loud enough, they'll get oiled. So there's fake urgency. There's also avoidable urgency. So there's some things that are truly urgent, but they're only urgent because either you left it until the last minute or somebody else left it until the last minute. I'm sure we can all relate to that. We've all done it. But then there is a positive type of urgency. I would say that they're both unproductive urgencies. But you do have a productive urgency, which is what I call reasonable urgency. And that's where we identify an issue or an opportunity that we need to respond to quickly because it's time sensitive, or someone else has identified that issue or that opportunity. And I guess my argument is let's get rid of the unproductive urgency so that we can deal with the productive urgency better and with less stress and with less drama.
Well, then, how do you deal with the productive urgency?
One of the challenges I faced when I was writing my book was, how do I talk to senior leaders especially about the idea of urgency, given the fact that they're the ones who would probably push back and say, no, we need urgency. And I realised that we can't make urgency the bad guy. we need to recognize that urgency is a reality, but if I'm going to create cultural change around this, I reckon we need to teach managers and leaders especially how to, what I call, moderate urgency. So they need to be able to either dial the urgency up or dial it down, depending on whether it is unproductive urgency and they need to dial it down and get rid of it, or whether it's productive urgency and we need to be able to respond to it in a meaningful way. So I reckon that in a lot of businesses, a culture has emerged where everyone is in reactive mode too much of the time, and it creates what I call acute and chronic urgency. And when people are in that acute and chronic urgency situation, what happens over time is their stress levels go through the roof and they begin to burn out. And people leave businesses that are highly reactive, and that becomes a part of their culture. So I reckon the people we need to target here are probably the managers and the leaders, because they're in the best position to be able to change the culture of their team or the culture of the organization and how it approaches urgency.
Do you recommend that people plan what they do at work? And if so, how should they plan?
Oh yeah, and planning is so important when it comes to working proactively. And I guess there's a number of different mindsets that we need to bring to our work. If at the personal level, if we want to change how we work ourselves around this. A good example of mindset when it comes to proactivity would be changing the toilet roll in your bathroom. I don't want to bring the conversation down, but this is so true. Some people, and I won't mention any names, they're not very proactive when it comes to changing the toilet rolls. You've done it, you've walked into a bathroom and there's no toilet roll in the toilet roll holder. Now, there could be some in the cupboard, but nobody's bothered to actually put it on the toilet roll holder. I reckon that's a good example of someone who doesn't have a proactive mindset. I believe that I do have a proactive mindset, so I'll always make sure that if the toilet roll is getting low, I'll replace it or I'll put another one nearby. And if we've only got 5 toilet rolls in the cupboard, I'll make sure that we put it on the shopping list to buy some, so we never run out of toilet rolls in my house. I reckon if you take that example and bring it to work, how many people operate in a way that means that they're not actually thinking about the future. They're not anticipating what's going to be needed by themselves or other people. So the first thing we need to do is to bring a more proactive mindset to our workplaces. But I also think that when it comes to planning, which was your original question, that is an example of a proactive activity that we can do that will dial down the urgency. So I'm often working with teams of people who've got goals and objectives in place and they've got projects that they're working on. So there's lots of planning that happens, but it often happens at the organizational level or potentially at the team level or the project level. But what is missing for most people is planning at the personal level. And that creates a gap between what we're trying to achieve and what we're actually spending our time on a day-to-day basis. So I simply tell people to build a routine around planning, which includes a monthly planning session with yourself, where you stop and you step back and get some perspective and think about what are my big priorities for the month ahead. I reckon there should be a weekly planning session that you have with yourself, which is simply half an hour organising the week ahead to make sure that you're working on the right priorities and you are ready for all the activities that are going to come up in the week ahead. And I also reckon we need a daily planning process, which is just 10 minutes. But the purpose of that is to get you focused for the day. If you can build those 3 personal planning routines into your schedule, it will really change your work style from reactive to proactive.
Well, finally, Dermot, has COVID-19 made us all slow down just that little bit? And has that changed the way we work?
Oh yeah, I really reckon it has. I don't think the things are going to go back to the way they were. The fact that we've all learned to work from home in such a short period of time, and the fact that the way we work has just completely shifted, I reckon a lot of people are going back to work now with the mindset of, I'm not going to work the way I used to work. I want something different because I've experienced the positives of working in a less pressured environment. Because the truth is, when we're working from home, we might be in Zoom meetings all day, but most people find it just a little less pressured. And they've had to force themselves to work more proactively because they are self-determined. Instead of working with lots of people around them telling them what to do, they've had to be a lot more organised and self-determined. So I think managing urgency is the perfect subject for right now. And I'm hoping that personally, because of COVID-19, that I've slowed down a bit, and I hope that I can keep that as a part of my working style for the rest of my career.
That was author, speaker and director of Adapt Productivity, Dermot Crowley. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow @BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.